Maria Lopez gazed at the adoption paperwork through tired eyes. At 38, her hands showed the wear of a night shift nurse who had spent the last 10 years saving lives while raising 3 kids on her own. Her modest home on the dusty edge of San Antonio wasn't fancy, but it had always been enough, until now. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Miss Lopez?" The center director's voice held a trace of disapproval. "Taking in 5 more children is unheard of for someone in your position." Maria didn't lift her head. She calmly continued signing each document with deliberate care. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed, throwing sharp shadows across her face. Outside, the Texas summer heat scorched the concrete, life carrying on, indifferent to the moment unfolding behind closed doors. 6 weeks earlier, Sergeant Daniel Price's flag-covered coffin had returned home from Iraq. His 5 children had stood in perfect silence at the funeral, just as their father had taught them. The oldest was 12, the youngest barely 4. Maria had observed from a distance, her own children standing quietly by her side. No family came forward. The military looked for next of kin, but time was running out. Soon, the children would be placed in the system, likely split between different foster homes. "These kids need constancy, not charity," the caseworker said, nudging another form toward her. "The state provides some financial support, but it's rarely enough." Maria finally spoke, her tone gentle but firm. "We don't need to be flawless, just present." What no one at the agency realized was how Daniel had arrived at Maria's home 3 years earlier, during the worst snowstorm Texas had seen in decades. Her heat had gone out. Her youngest was burning with fever. She'd been working back-to-back shifts with no break. Without a word, Daniel repaired her heater, filled her fridge, and cleared her driveway. When she tried to repay him, he simply said, "My wife would have wanted me to help. That's what the neighbors do." Now Maria was honoring an unspoken promise, not through grand acts or public praise. There were no cameras, no viral posts, no emotional interviews, just signatures, documents, and the quiet reshaping of a life to welcome 5 more hearts. The director remained unconvinced. "You do understand this is forever? These aren't temporary foster placements." Maria nodded, stacking the papers neatly before rising to her feet. Her scrubs were wrinkled from the overnight shift, but she stood tall. Through the glass, she could see Daniel's children waiting in the play area, their things packed in worn duffel bags. "I understand," she said. "Permanent." So did their father. As she headed for the exit, the social worker called out, "How do you plan to handle all this by yourself?" Maria didn't look back. She simply paused, hand resting on the doorknob. Some burdens aren't meant to be carried alone, but someone has to take that first step. Maria kept a small wooden box hidden under her bed. Inside was a folded letter she'd never mailed to her younger brother Carlos, a Marine who never made it back from his 3rd tour, 10 years prior. Next to it lay another letter, this one from Daniel Price, dated 3 days before his final operation. "If anything happens to me," it read in careful script, "make sure they're not alone. You're the only one I trust with this, Maria. You understand what it means to carry on." The connection between Maria and Sergeant Price went far beyond neighborly concern. They shared a quiet bond of grief only military families truly know. Daniel had served in the same unit as Carlos. When word of Carlos's death arrived, it was Daniel who showed up at Maria's door, still in uniform, offering not platitudes, but silent solidarity. "Your brother saved my life twice," he told her during a rare moment of vulnerability. "I couldn't save him, but I gave him my word I'd watch over his family if the worst happened." Years later, when Daniel's wife passed away from cancer, Maria returned that support, organizing meals, helping with childcare between shifts. Their families became woven together out of need and mutual respect, not romance. Inside the envelope with Daniel's letter was a military ID card, with words handwritten on the back, "To the bravest civilian I know." The adoption process unfolded quietly. Maria transformed her living room into a bedroom, worked extra hours, and rearranged her entire life to care for 8 children. Her eldest, now 16, took on helping with homework and making dinners. Her middle child led a clothing drive at school. Her youngest embraced the new siblings with the open-hearted acceptance only a child can show. 4 weeks after the adoption became official, an envelope marked from the Pentagon arrived. Inside was a short notice requesting a private meeting. No context, no explanation. Maria assumed it was about Daniel's benefits or a clerical issue. What she couldn't know was that Daniel's commanding officer had submitted a thorough report of their shared history to the Presidential Military Family Recognition Program. Her story had reached the Oval Office during a routine briefing. The meeting was held at a nearby military base, away from the press and public eye. Maria wore her best dress, the same one she had worn to Carlos's funeral. She expected red tape and officials. Instead, she found herself guided into a room where the commander-in-chief awaited. "Miss Lopez," the president said, extending his hand. "I wanted to meet the woman who reflects the values we strive to uphold." Maria stood motionless, uncertain of the proper etiquette or what was expected. Behind the president stood Daniel's superior officer and several other senior officials. On a small table rested a velvet-lined box and a leather-bound folder. "Sergeant Price wrote to me before embarking on his final assignment," the president continued. "He didn't request medals or accolades. He asked that someone look after his children and the nurse who lived next door. He said you were the strongest individual he'd ever known." The president opened the velvet box, revealing the Civilian Medal of Honor, the highest award available to a non-military citizen. Beside it, he placed a folder containing academic trust funds for all 8 children, guaranteeing their college futures under a presidential order. "This nation draws its strength from individuals like you," the president said, lowering his voice to keep the moment private. "Not because we tell your story, but because you live it." Maria's hands shook as she accepted the awards, not out of pride or excitement, but from the gravity of what they symbolized: the legacy of 2 soldiers, the future of 8 children, and the quiet grace of service with no spotlight. As the meeting concluded, the president had one final request. "The media will want this story. It's up to you whether to share it." Maria reflected before replying. "With all due respect, sir, some brave acts don't need an audience. These kids have lost enough without becoming symbols." The president slowly nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her reply. "Then we'll safeguard your privacy, just as you've upheld their memory. Many do what's right when watched. She did it when no one even knew her name. If you still believe in the power of silent deeds, type respect." The story should have ended there, a private commendation for a personal sacrifice, but true bravery rarely stays hidden. At Daniel's memorial 1 year later, his commanding officer spoke of the family Daniel left behind. Without naming Maria, he described how a single mother of 3 had stepped in when no one else would, how she turned her humble home into a sanctuary for 5 grieving children, how she worked night shifts and slept in 4-hour blocks to keep a promise to a fallen brother. The account spread throughout the military world. Veterans groups began calling the base, asking to know more about this extraordinary woman. Military spouses coordinated food deliveries and clothing drives for the family. But Maria turned down interviews and redirected all donations to a foundation supporting children of fallen service members. "This isn't about me," she told the local news crew who arrived at her door. "This is about keeping a promise." Her quiet refusal only deepened public admiration. In Washington, a senator introduced the Quiet Courage Initiative, allocating more aid to families who adopt children of troops killed in the line of duty. The bill passed unanimously, a rare political consensus driven by Maria's unspoken resolve. The same social worker who once doubted Maria's abilities now traveled nationwide, sharing her story. "I mistook silence for fragility," she confessed during a national child welfare summit. "I failed to see that true power often speaks without noise." The children's teachers observed the shift in their progress. The eldest, once angry and withdrawn, now mentored peers coping with similar grief. The middle kids thrived in group sports. The youngest displayed a unique gift for comforting classmates in pain. One educator wrote an article in a teaching journal titled "From Turmoil to Tenacity: A Single Mother's Impact," illustrating how persistent love can transform trauma. Still, Maria remained resolutely private. She accepted medical care for the kids but declined any personal spotlight. When offered a bigger house by a veterans charity, she politely declined, saying that true stability came not from square footage, but from a steady presence. Her quiet decision sparked a ripple effect. Within 3 months, 12 families across Texas had stepped up to adopt children of fallen service members. A teenage boy who'd spent most of his life in foster care looked at his temporary guardians and asked, "Could I stay here forever like those Price kids?" A retired couple turned their quiet home into a temporary shelter for siblings waiting for adoption. Saying Maria's story moved them to act. The president, honoring his vow to respect her privacy, never said her name during a Veterans Day speech, but he spoke of ordinary citizens performing extraordinary acts of loyalty. Without expecting applause, his eyes briefly met Maria's in the audience where she stood with all 8 children, each wearing a tiny flag pin over their hearts. The Department of Defense launched a new support system connecting military widows and widowers to local aid. They called it Operation Price, a subtle nod that most missed but carried deep meaning for those who knew where it came from. 6 months after the adoption, Maria received a letter personally delivered by the commander who had served alongside both Daniel and her brother. Enclosed was a unit patch and a short note. "Your brother once told me real bravery isn't found in battle, but in the daily choice to prioritize others. He would see himself in you." That evening, Maria gathered all 8 children in their cozy living room, and without saying a word, placed 2 folded flags on the mantel, one for Daniel and one for her brother. Between them, she added a framed photo of all 8 kids together. "Family doesn't always come from blood," she told them, her voice steady. "Though tears welled up, sometimes it's created through promises. Honored, some stories don't need millions of views, they just need to be remembered. If you believe that quiet love can shape the world." Type courage. 5 years passed. The spotlight faded, but the impact grew. Maria still worked night shifts. Though now she was a nurse supervisor, her new schedule let her be home. When the kids returned from school, the eldest, Price child, had graduated with honors and earned a full scholarship to a military academy. Though he aimed to become a doctor, not a soldier, "I want to save lives like you do," he told Maria on graduation day. Their home stayed simple but had evolved. The backyard now featured a garden where each child tended their own vegetables. The garage was turned into a study area with 8 desks in a circle. The walls were filled with artwork, sports medals, and academic awards. Living proof that they weren't just surviving but thriving. The dining table, extended with mismatched sections, always had one empty seat. Maria explained it was for those who protect us but can't return. Not a symbol of sorrow, but a tribute to presence and memory. Understanding that loss still shapes family, on the wall hung 2 folded flags in identical display cases with a wooden plaque between them. Engraved with the words, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph of presence over absence." The neighborhood had changed too. Locals now gathered for weekly Sunday dinners, sharing food and staying to help with homework. Fellow nurses shifted their hours so Maria could attend school. Functions, a retired vet taught the older boys carpentry. In his garage, a military widow started a support group for the girls at the high school graduation of the second oldest Price child. The principal set aside the script. "In our community," she said, looking at Maria, "we've seen something extraordinary. She didn't just take in children, she embraced responsibility and carried it more gracefully than many ever could." Maria's children, now grown, spoke of their larger family, not as a weight their mother bore, but as the greatest lesson they'd learned. Her eldest, now accepted into medical school, wrote in his application essay, "My mom showed me that family isn't based on circumstance but on choice. She chose courage over comfort every single day." The youngest Price child, now 9, had no memories of his biological father yet. When asked to draw his family at school, he included not just his siblings and Maria, but 2 figures in uniform, watching from above. Guardians, not ghosts, on peaceful nights when schoolwork was done and the little ones were asleep. Maria would sometimes sit quietly on the porch, staring at stars dim behind city lights. She never talked about the hardship or what she'd given up when people asked how she managed everything. She simply smiled and said, "Some burdens are heavy because they matter. Not all who serve wear uniforms. Some people quietly do what's right and leave behind echoes that never disappear." She had just filed the last set of adoption papers when the social worker sneered. "You think you can raise 5 orphans? Can you even care for yourself?" The room went still. No one understood who they had just questioned until the president's secretary called the center's director's desk directly. "Who is she? And why did an entire country bow its head in gratitude?"